This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. China keeping its cards close to the chest after the U.S. says that a trade deal has been signed. Beijing only confirming details of a framework from the Geneva talks this month. Now, India pushing for a permanent fix to its decades-long border dispute with China after their defense chiefs met at the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit. And China's industrial profits swing back into sharp decline as factory activity slows in the face of broader economic stress and a fragile trade truce with the U.S. All options on the table as EU leaders meet to discuss a new U.S. trade proposal. China waiting in the wings with a top Chinese diplomat set to visit Europe next week. Also in East Asia tonight, a Japanese airport forced to cancel flights after a black bear was found roaming on the runway. China confirms details of a trade framework with the U.S. after Washington said it had reached an agreement with Beijing to accelerate rare earth shipments to the United States. The Chinese Commerce Ministry says that China will review and approve export applications while the U.S. will lift trade measures against China, although no mention of critical minerals in a statement, despite Washington saying that it has reached a deal with Beijing to speed up rare earth exports. A U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told Bloomberg China is going to deliver rare earths to the U.S. Well, President Donald Trump said that the U.S. has signed a deal with China.
We just signed with China yesterday, right? Just signed with China. We have everybody. We're not going to make deals with everybody. Some we're just going to send them a letter, say, thank you very much. You're going to pay 25, 35, 45%. In the China deal, we're starting to open up China, things that never really could have happened. And the relationship with every country has been very good.
And CNA's Deborah Wong joins us live now from Hong Kong. Deborah, U.S. and China, they're offering slightly different accounts. Basically, what is China's response to the U.S. saying that a deal has actually been reached?
So we just heard from Mr. Trump there. He's now saying that, U.S. and China have reached an agreement. He said that the agreement with China involves an expedition of rare earth shipments to the U.S. And he's also said, and I quote, in the China deal, we're starting to open up China. Now, that's a very bold statement because China's statement is actually a lot more measured. While China's Commerce Ministry did confirm that, both sides have come to an agreement on details of the framework, they'd actually stopped short at saying that they will be expediting shipments of rare earths to the U.S. specifically. It only said it will strengthen the review and approval of such export applications in accordance with the law. Now, for some context on the controls, these were introduced in April. It does not ban exports. What it does is it requires government approval for each application, for each shipment as well. So it does take some time to be confirmed. Now, analysts are saying that it's quite unlikely that these export controls will be lifted anytime soon, since China is the world's largest provider of rare earths, and it also can use this as leverage in any trade talks, not just with the U.S. And it does also ensure that China can retain some sufficient supply for its own domestic priorities. So, these controls are not going to be lifted anytime soon.
Okay, well, we do know that rare earths, that has long been a sticking point for trade relations, but how essentially should we read into today's announcements by China? I mean, does it signal some kind of a shift in de-escalating tensions?
When we look at, details of the full framework, it's not immediately clear because we don't know the specifics just yet. Specifically on rare earths, there are some nuance differences that we just discussed earlier. It does show that, despite the differences, there is some progress. We're getting a sense that both major powers, they intend to remain civil, they intend to remain diplomatic, because you look at the tone of the statements, it does contrast very vividly, very strikingly with the statements that we saw earlier this year, where there was a whole tit-for-tat approach. As part of the framework. We also do know that US will be removing some of its limits, although it hasn't quite announced the details on that yet. But we do know that aside from the rare earths issue, another sticky point for China really is US export restrictions on semiconductor chips, as well as advanced tech to China. So that's a really key point to look out for any indication of major de-escalation. After all, we are still within the 90-day tariff pause, and anything can change during this period. Natalie.
Well, thanks very much for that report. CNA's Deborah Wong in Hong Kong. Now, meantime, EU leaders are discussing a new trade proposal from the US as they meet for a summit in Brussels. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says that all options remain on the table. US President Donald Trump had threatened to raise an additional 50% levy for EU goods if no agreement is reached before the 9th of July deadline. But Germany and France, the bloc's two biggest economies, appear at odds. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz calls for a quick and simple deal that can be reached within the deadline, while French President Emmanuel Macron says that his country will not accept terms that are not balanced. Meanwhile, China confirms its foreign minister will travel to Europe next week to hold high-level talks with his counterparts from the EU, Germany and France. The meetings between the top diplomats will likely set the tone for the China-EU summit taking place in Beijing next month. Will Denslow joins us live now from Brussels. Will, how close are we exactly to a trade deal between the US and the EU, and what are some of the remaining hurdles?
Well, the European Commission isn't giving much away in these negotiations, only saying that they are ongoing and that they are intensifying as both sides work towards what, until this week, was a July 9th deadline. That is still the parameters we're working with. But of course, Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, stating that that deadline might now be flexible. We know from Ursula von der Leyen speaking to EU leaders on Thursday that they have received the latest text from the US. She said that they are reviewing that, and I guess we'll see where negotiations go from there. You mentioned some discrepancies between EU leaders. Germany very much keen for a trade deal to be reached. We heard from Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, on Thursday, saying that he favoured a quick and simple trade deal rather than a slow and complex one. The message, though, from other EU leaders, notably the likes of France, they say they want to see something more comprehensive to ensure it is a win-win agreement. However, there has been some movement from the position of France, with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, suggesting he'd be willing to accept a US trade-off that would see 10% levies on both sides. Previously, the EU had stated that they want to see a zero-for-zero approach. So that is certainly a one to watch as these negotiations continue.
I want to focus on China now because Beijing has confirmed that its foreign minister Wang Yi will be visiting Europe at the end of the month. What do you think could come out of these talks? And is the EU basically recalibrating its approach to China?
Well, it is the 50th anniversary this year of diplomatic ties between the EU and China. There's certainly plenty of scope for relations to intensify, considering the fact that there are these volatile trade relationships between the EU and Washington. We've heard from President Xi Jinping, who said recently that he's open to a brighter future between the two going forward. However, despite that, there has been a somewhat more hawkish stance from Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, in recent weeks on the issue of China trade, considering the fact this is majorly significant as trade between the two account for nearly 30% of global GDP. But speaking at the G7 recently, von der Leyen said that China's unwillingness to live within the constraints of the rules-based international system. She accused China with their subsidies, she said, of distorting the market with intent. So some incredibly strong language there from the Commission President as we head towards these high-level talks with the Foreign Minister Wang Yi set to make a trip to a number of European capitals, including here in Brussels.
Right, I'm sure we'll hear more from you then. Thanks so very much. Will Denslow in Brussels. India says that it is seeking a permanent solution to a decades-old border dispute with China following talks between their defense chiefs on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation summit. Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh met his Chinese counterpart, Dong Jin, in the Chinese city of Qingdao. According to India's Defense Ministry, Mr. Singh stressed on solving issues between the two countries through a structured roadmap of engagement and de-escalation. He also called for bridging the trust deficit created after the 2020 border clash, which resulted in the deaths of Chinese and Indian soldiers and sparked a prolonged military standoff. Well, despite these diplomatic moves, defense ministers of the SCO member countries failed to adopt a joint statement at the end of their talks. India says it's due to a lack of consensus over terrorism concerns.
On our side, India wanted concerns on terrorism reflected in the document, which was not acceptable to one particular country, and therefore the statement was not adopted.
Indian media reported that New Delhi refused to sign the document as it omitted reference to the deadly April attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir. 26 people were gunned down by terrorists in the incident. Now, a spokesperson for China's defense ministry said that the talks achieved successful results. During the meeting, Beijing called for stronger multilateral cooperation and joint efforts to safeguard global stability. The SCO defense ministers were meeting just after the NATO summit in the Netherlands, where leaders agreed to increase defense spending. Beijing has long tried to position the 10-member SCO as a counterweight to Western-led power blocs. Japan's finance minister has spoken up over a news report that says the country is being used as a base for the smuggling of chemicals for fentanyl. Mr. Katsunobu Kato told reporters today that the Customs Department has not recorded any cases of seizing the drug in the 6 years through 2024, and that includes illegal imports and exports. He was responding to a Nikkei report that said a Chinese organization allegedly used a base in Japan to smuggle chemicals for making fentanyl into the U.S. Mr. Kato said that Japan will take all necessary steps to prevent the smuggling of illegal drugs. Time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Chinese electric vehicle maker Xiaomi's shares soar to record high as customers rush to buy its new SUV. And the Canadian firm courting Japan's 7-Eleven for a takeover says there will be a decision soon. A good Friday evening. You are watching East Asia tonight, and we've got Henry Yin standing by with the very latest updates from the business world. And Henry, I believe we're seeing fresh signs of weakness in China's economy, all that amid the trade tensions with the U.S.
That's right, Oteli. We are seeing those disappointments come straight from China's factory floors. Well, China's industrial profits swinging back into sharp decline in May from a year earlier. Pressure from higher U.S. tariffs and lingering deflation in the economy taking a toll on growth. Industry saw their main bottom lines drop 9% on year, snapping a 2-month growth streak. That's the largest monthly decline since October last year. Profits suffered from sluggish domestic demand and declining prices of industrial products. U.S.-China trade uncertainties also adding to the strain. A few signs, including an unexpected pickup in retail sales growth last month, suggested some resilience among households. Still, the market consensus is that more policy support is required to bolster a fragile economic recovery. Well, the weak industrial profit data weighing on equity markets, but news of a trade truce with the U.S. and as a ceasefire between Israel and Iran capped losses. And we are seeing the mainland market ended up the trade mixed, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index down by less than 0.2%. Hong Kong has reclaimed the title of the world's top equity capital market in the first half of this year, beating Nasdaq and the New York Stock Exchange. The territory is also rolling out capital market reforms as it seeks to build on the momentum. Nearly $13 billion have been raised through IPOs and secondary listings, up more than 8-fold on year, with the EV battery maker CATL leading the way, raising some $4.6 billion. And fast fashion giant Shein is also reportedly looking to go public in the later half of the year. which would re-establish Hong Kong's standing as a global fundraising center amid volatility from U.S. trade policies. Global investors are flocking to Chinese markets as analysts say the world's second-largest economy has shown resilience despite trade uncertainties. And shares of Xiaomi closed 3.6% higher after surging as much as 8% in Hong Kong earlier. The jump coming on the back of overwhelming response to its newly launched YU7 SUV. It went on sale yesterday, and within the first hour, it received nearly 300,000 orders. That's more than 3 times the bookings it received for its earlier SU7 model released last year. And the company calls it, quote, a miraculous moment for the industry. The YU7, priced at around $35,000, is set to compete with Tesla's Model Y. And analysts say it's cheaper and offers better performance than Tesla's Model Y, and that has fanned speculation that Tesla may have to cut prices to fight back. Tesla is currently 5th in the highly competitive Chinese EV market. Meantime, Xiaomi's strong showing is a reprieve for its founder Lei Jun, who faced sharp criticism after 3 people were killed in an accident in SU7 model, triggering regulatory concerns over the safety of autonomous driving. Toyota has just notched a 3rd consecutive monthly sales record thanks to strong demand across the US, Japan and China, despite President Donald Trump's tariffs. The world's largest automaker sold more than 955,000 vehicles globally in May, up 8% from 1 year ago. And Toyota says it will hike prices on some U.S. models by over $200 starting next month, a move that mirrors efforts by major automakers to cushion the blow from the ongoing global trade tensions. Japanese car makers remain heavily reliant on the U.S. market, and the stakes are high. Billions in potential losses hang in the balance if talks with the White House fail to bring tariffs down. And shares of major automakers closing higher in Tokyo. While shares of Nike surging more than 9% in pre-market trading despite reporting its worst quarterly earnings since 2022. This as investors remain confident in the company's ability to reverse course following the return of its former chief executive to the top job. Nike reported some $11.1 billion in revenue for the last quarter of its fiscal year, down 12% on year. And profit in the same period down more than 20%. The drop is smaller than expected and comes as Nike's direct-to-consumer sales strategy failed to pay off. Well, the sportswear maker is also contending with the Trump administration's volatile tariffs, estimating an additional cost of up to $1 billion under current duties. Nike says it will reduce its production in China as part of plans to restructure its supply chains to deal with U.S. tariffs. Shoes made in China account for 16% of Nike's U.S. imports. Alimentation Couche-Tard, the Canadian convenience store giant trying to take over Japanese 7-Eleven, has reportedly started talks with its Japanese rival on a possible deal and says a decision will be made soon. The Canadian retail group did not give a specific timing. During an earnings call late yesterday, Couche-Tard's chief executive declined to comment on the likelihood of a deal, but said the process is not expected to drag on indefinitely. Couche-Tard and 7&I struck a non-disclosure agreement in April. And several potential buyers, including investment funds, are believed to have come forward to purchase about 2,000 U.S. stores in order to meet U.S. antitrust regulations. While at the same time, 7&I is continuing to review Couche-Tard's acquisition proposal. Singapore prosecutors have requested additional time to build their case as investigations into 3 men accused of fraud involving the suspected transfer of NVIDIA AI chips remain in early stages. Prosecutors told the courts that new documents have emerged, requiring further investigation. The 3 men face charges of illegally exporting U.S.-controlled NVIDIA AI chips. Authorities requested an 8-week adjournment as police inquiries continue. No new charges have been made. Well, the trio were first charged in February after a tip-off revealed the chips were allegedly headed to China, bypassing U.S. export controls. Since the last hearing in May, the police had conducted 10 follow-up interviews with the persons of interest, witnesses, and the accused persons. The police forensic branch has examined 35 of the 53 electronic devices linked to the case, with the data extraction still pending on the remaining devices. And they're also reviewing new documents that have surfaced since the last hearing. The next hearing is scheduled for August the 22nd, and the three men remain out on bail with amounts ranging from 600,000 Sing dollars to 1 million Sing dollars. Shares of South Korean mobile payment provider KakaoPay tumbled as much as 17% after it resumed trading as authorities raised concerns over the digital wallet's potential foray into stablecoins. The Korea Exchange suspended trading of KakaoPay twice this week, citing extreme volatility. KakaoPay has nearly tripled in value over the past month, fueled by speculation that it would adopt stablecoins. The drop today comes after the stock was flagged as a, quote, investment risk by the exchange. There is mixed sentiment about stablecoins in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung's Democratic Party has introduced a bill which would allow companies to issue stablecoins, building on Mr. Lee's election campaign pledge. The country's central bank, however, warns that stablecoins issued by non-bank entities could weaken monetary policy. Well, the return of K-pop icon BTS is stirring excitement not just with fans but also among investors, who hope that their reunion after military service could reignite interest in Korean pop culture. 5 members of the group were recently discharged, joining 2 other members who finished earlier. While the exact timing of their group comeback is still undecided, solo projects and individual concerts are already underway. A documentary about BTS fanbase will be released next month, and there is also anticipation for a potential tour in 2026. The boy group's reunion comes at an important time for the K-pop industry. Sales of physical K-pop albums dropped in 2024, the first time in a decade, sparking some concern about the genre of popularity. And the industry has also seen a slew of scandals, including lawsuits between artists and record labels. For BTS, though, their fan base has grown despite the hiatus, and shares of HYBE, the band's label, have surged 57% this year. And that's all for business. Back to you, Telly.
Thanks so very much for that, Henry. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Chinese consumers are buying everything from iPhones to washing machines at a discount, all thanks to the government. Is the country's massive subsidy program sustainable? We ask an expert. Nuclear talks with the US, denying any agreement to return to the table. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China only confirming details of a trade framework with the US from their Geneva talks this month, after Washington said it's reached a rare earths agreement with Beijing. India seeks a permanent fix to its long-running border dispute with China, after defense ministers from both sides met on the sidelines of a security summit. China's industrial profits plunged 9.1% in May from a year earlier, and the latest sign that Beijing's stimulus efforts are falling short in boosting the economy. Now, China is on a domestic consumption drive, launching a consumer goods trade-in program in March last year to boost household spending. Well, the government has offered cash rebates to consumers who swap their old goods and appliances for new ones. And many retail platforms also offer up to 20% off goods without consumers making a trade. Well, this year, the initiative is backed by $42 billion in ultra-long-term special bonds. That's double the amount allocated last year. Now, the scheme has also gone beyond home appliances and electric cars, and now also includes electronics like smartphones, tablets, smartwatches, and fitness bands. Now, according to China's Ministry of Commerce, the scheme has generated about $153 billion in sales from January to May this year. Cars, home appliances, and digital devices are some of the top performing categories. But the scheme has reportedly been suspended in some parts of the country due to funding shortfalls and system upgrades, among other reasons. Now, to help us understand all this a little bit better, let's bring in Zhou Hao, Chief Economist and Head of Research at Guotai Junan International. Well, thanks, Hao, for joining us this evening. So we've been covering the report about all these suspensions of subsidies in China's trading program. I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts in terms of the sustainability of such initiatives?
Thank you for having me. I think, of course, it's a very kind of popular scheme in China for now. I can give you one typical example. Actually, 10 years ago, my wife always tried to come to Hong Kong to buy an iPhone. And right now, she's in Hong Kong right now. And she always tried to get iPhone from onshore China because, you can get kind of about 2,000 Chinese yuan kind of subsidy. This is actually a very attractive program, and the problem right now is that maybe the government somewhere they're short of funds, and in the meantime maybe it's too popular, and looks like the consumption is not as bad as many thought. I think basically this actually reflect a few scenarios, a few phenomena in China for now. I think everyone knows that yesterday there's a kind of very popular EV car launched. The new kind of version in China yesterday, and in about 2 or 3 minutes, they ordered more than 220 kind of thousand kind of cars in about 3 minutes. So basically, I think people always think that the Chinese people save too much, they don't want to spend money. But in the meantime, we also see a lot of kind of popular kind of items like Pop Mart, like Boo Boo, these kind of things, very kind of popular as well. So I think from this kind of perspective, basically we can still see that there's kind of potential there. And in the meantime, the government help, on somewhat. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is still looks like, the government cannot, afford this kind of scheme for river. They can help somewhat on the margin, but the most important thing is still, people have to make sure that they earn enough money to buy what river they want to buy. So I think, to answer your question, I think this kind of subsidy will be helpful at the margin, but won't be the most important driver for consumption in China.
Well, everyone likes a bargain. I mean, your wife included. I hope she got the phone that she wanted. But I want to touch on something like this thing called the local government debt, right? I mean, that remains one of the biggest issues that the central government wants to address. And this scheme itself, does it have any effect?
Well, I think, it's a different scheme because, when we talk about the local government issue, that issue is actually, the local government have to address this kind of issue themselves. And from subsidies scheme, they're from the central government, pocket. So I think there's two kind of channels to spend money. I think maybe people have some kind of skeptical on that, but from the mechanism itself, it is. So basically, from this kind of things, I think maybe we have to say that the subsidy itself is very popular, and people want to spend or use this kind of scheme, but from the central government perspective, they always want to control the pace of the money or the budget they can use. For local government debt, I think probably when we talk to investors here, they're in Hong Kong or in China, looks like they're not very concerned, or I mean, they're less concerned than a few years back. I have to say that the debt will be there, and the debt actually is still rising. But investors still believe that the debt won't be blow up in the short term.
So these trading schemes just sort of like a short-term fix. And if you have the opportunity to advise the Chinese policymakers, I mean, what kind of alternative strategy would you recommend? I mean, the key strategy.
Well, I think I will recommend like Singapore's CPF scheme. Basically, I think on the most important thing is that at some age you will be retiring, and of course, it's important to help people to consume when they when they are relatively old. So I think from this kind of perspective, I will recommend the Chinese government try to learn more from the Singapore CPF scheme, and basically somehow help the people, Chinese people, Chinese residents from relatively long-term perspective. I think a shopping voucher is always important and make wives happy, but from economist perspective, the most important thing is still the social safety net and the social securities.
Yeah, we have those CDC vouchers as well that make a lot of people happy here. But let's talk about there's a lot of talk on the ground about increasing consumption share of GDP to around 70% by 2035, meaning that Chinese shoppers buying 70% of everything in the country in the next decade. So how realistic is that goal given China's current structural issues?
Well, I'm not very kind of concerned about this, to be honest. Basically, we can see that the goods actually are very very in good quality and low pricing in China. And my daughter, she's 7 years old. She always go to the e-commerce platform to buy very very kind of small but relatively very cheap actually items. I think you can deliver. Everyone knows that you can deliver for free to Hong Kong as well. So I think from this kind of things we can see that basically consumption itself is not a big issue in China, and the people still have this kind of money, and goods are not very good, not very expensive as well. So I think all these kind of things point to that China is in its own kind of path to consumption-led economy or led model, which might be different from what we think or thought in the past. Because normally we are seeing we thought that Chinese people consume more and the service price will go up, and basically overall kind of consumption will pick up from this kind of perspective. But I think looks like China is relatively in a different kind of model, which is that people consume more and more goods, but service price still really flat. I think this is actually a very interesting part, and the consumption share of the GDP as share of GDP continues to rise. I think maybe we don't have to have a clear target on that, but I have to say that the consumption is really playing a critical role in China, because if you look at the traditional engines like housing and exports, they're losing steam, and the consumption will definitely taking the driving seat in the future.
Yeah, interesting point you've made there about these consumption habits. And your daughter at 7 years old, she's actually already shopping online. That's quite amazing as well.
Yeah. She always send me the link.
Right, so she has a generous father and husband. So looking ahead, right? Let's talk about policy interventions, fiscal, monetary, or structural. Do you think what is it going to take to do the best job helping both shoppers like your wife and daughter and also the businesses actually feel confident about the future? Because there is also quite a number of people, young people coming out of schools, and they have no jobs.
Well, I think it's very interesting points here, because on one hand we know that basically the business side they're facing kind of diminishing margin, pricing margin or profit margin. But in the meantime, we also see that some kind of so-called super company always coming up in China, like a few names recently. So I think if 1% of the Chinese companies make special things or make think out of the box, things will be different. And in the meantime, we do see that graduates, the young graduates, they're looking for a job. But I have to say that they're really in good quality. I actually hire a few of them, and I realized that the next generation in China is a much better kind of education quality. And I think, in short term wise, maybe they're facing some challenges, but I don't think this will be a real issue for them. I think, these kind of problems will be only short term. If you really talk to them, you will see that they are in a very, very good kind of habit, and also they're in a very, very good quality as well. So I think, this is totally different from what I saw in maybe 20 years ago. And I think, these kind of young talents will definitely find their best outlet in the market.
I hear your optimism, Hao, and thank you for ending this interview on such an optimistic note. Joe Hao there, Chief Economist at Guotai Junan International. Now, Iran has denied it's resuming talks with America. U.S. President Donald Trump previously said that the two sides would meet next week, but Iran's foreign minister shut down that speculation, stressing that Tehran is assessing whether any talks would be in its interest at all. Diplomatic efforts were disrupted by U.S. military strikes on Sunday.
توافقی الان برای شروع مجدد مذاکره صورت نگرفت. من به صراحت عرض می‌کنم نه قراری گذاشته شده، نه قولی گذاشته شده، نه اصلا صحبتی ما کردیم برای شروع مجدد مذاکره.
Now, his denial follows Iranian lawmakers passing a binding bill to suspend cooperation with the UN's atomic agency. Now, doubts are growing about the effectiveness of the U.S. military strikes after a leaked Pentagon report downplayed the impact. President Donald Trump is pushing back against a report's suggestion that Iran preemptively moved its stockpile of enriched uranium. Speculation was earlier triggered by these satellite images of the Fordo nuclear site. Now, they show a convoy of vehicles near the entrance to the underground facility. The Financial Times reports early European intelligence suggesting the uranium stockpile is largely intact. The White House and U.S. Defense Secretary backed up President Trump's position.
So we were watching closely, and there was no indication to the United States that any of that enriched uranium was moved prior to the strike.
So I'm not aware of any intelligence that I've reviewed that says things were not where they were supposed to be, moved or otherwise.
At a Pentagon briefing, Defense Chief Hegseth insisted the strikes were a historically successful attack. He accused the media of, quote, fawning over the leaked report, which was a preliminary assessment. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, showed videos of tests with the bunker-busting bomb to illustrate its potential power on the nuclear sites. But there was no new evidence of the actual impact. Now, satellite images have so far only managed to capture damage above ground. The Trump administration continues to insist that 3 sites targeted were obliterated. Iran admits there was serious damage, but the supreme leader, in his first appearance since the U.S. strikes, said it was nothing significant, accusing President Trump of inflating the impact.
رئیس جمهور آمریکا در شرح اون چی که واقع شده بود بزرگ نمایی غیر متعارفی کرد. معلوم شد که به این بزرگ نمایی احتیاج داره.
Well, the White House hit back, accusing the Ayatollah of trying to save face. U.S. senators have received a briefing, and the reactions appear to follow party lines.
They blew these places up in a major league way. Major league setback, years, not months.
To me, it still appears that we have only set back the Iranian nuclear program by a handful of months.
And Nick Harper explains why the U.S. has struggled to provide verifiable evidence of the scope of damage to Iran's nuclear facilities.
We've got plenty of satellite imagery. There's lots of that. The US is showing it at briefing after briefing. What we don't have, though, are those on-the-ground assessments. And that would really come down to the UN watchdog, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. It would be up to their independent investigators to get on the ground. But that would only happen if Iran approves it. And what we've seen over recent years is Iran steadily stopping investigators investigating those nuclear facilities. Just on Wednesday this week, they approved a bill to suspend cooperation with the IAEA. And really, ever since Donald Trump withdrew from the original Iran nuclear agreement back in 2018, Iran has been limiting inspections, making it much harder for inspectors to look at facilities. Now, of course, if they were able to do do that, they would be able to provide that verifiable assessment, an independent assessment that isn't what we've got at the moment, which is really a he said, she said situation. The US and Iran both making unverified claims about exactly what took place and how destroyed those facilities were. And then there's that wider problem. Did Iran manage to move its uranium before the US strikes? The US is saying they didn't. However, the United Nations and the Europeans think that they did. And until that is verified, we will continue, I imagine, to see the Trump administration pushing hard on its claim, saying that it obliterated the sites and saying that none of the nuclear material was moved ahead of those strikes.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, a hairy situation at a Japanese airport that forced staff to cancel flights and declare the facility off limits for a whole day. And as mentioned, combining endurance and strength, this global fitness challenge is surging in popularity and reshaping the business of sport. Japan has carried out its first capital punishment in nearly 3 years, executing a man known as the Twitter killer. 34-year-old Takahiro Shiraishi was convicted for killing 9 people he had contacted on social media. The crimes came to light in 2017 when police traced the disappearance of a young woman to Shiraishi. The justice minister said he ordered the execution after careful consideration.
本件は自己の性的、そして金銭的欲求を満たすなどという誠に身勝手な理由から約2ヶ月の間に9名もの被害者の若く尊い人命が奪われるといった極めて重大かつ重大な結果を発生をさせ、社会にも大きな衝撃、そして不安感を与えた事件であります。
Police have also arrested 2 teachers in Japan for allegedly sharing indecent photos in a group chat in a case that has shocked the country. Education Minister Toshiko Abe reacted angrily today, telling reporters this cannot be tolerated. Police say the 2 men shared dozens of photos and videos of girls taken at school and shared them in a group chat that reportedly included other teachers. Japan is set to launch its first national background check system for sex offences for people who want to work with children. A Japanese airport was forced to cancel flights after a black bear was found roaming the runway. Quite the hairy situation for airport staff. The bear was spotted at northern Japan's Yamagata airport yesterday morning. Airport staff chased it away with a car, but had to declare the airport off limits for the day because the animal was still at large somewhere in the facility. Now, the bear wasn't caught but was not sighted again, and the airport has resumed operations. Human encounters with bears have reached record levels in Japan. More than 200 people were attacked, and half a dozen of them died between 2023 and 2024. Singapore is hosting its biggest high rocks race yet this weekend. The Global Fitness Challenge is testing physical limits and reshaping the business of sport, sparking new demand for gyms, training programs, and brands. Now, here is a look at how High Rocks is changing the way Singapore trains and builds a fitness economy.
8 runs, 8 workouts, 1 global race format. This is High Rocks, born in Germany but surging in popularity across Asia and elsewhere. The competitive fitness event blends endurance with functional strength training, with 1-kilometer runs in between workouts such as sandbag lunges and wall balls. The format is fixed worldwide. Its aim to deliver a consistent race experience no matter the location.
High Rocks is so popular because of the accessibility. The way that it's been designed is to make it very functional and very simple for people to do. I feel like I could take someone off the street, put them in front of a High Rocks exercise, and they would understand how to do it.
The simplicity and strain High Rocks guarantees is gaining it more fans. This weekend, Singapore hosts the High Rocks Open Asian Championship, the region's largest race to date.
High Rocks may have started in Europe, but here in Singapore, it's found fertile ground.
From amateur athletes to commercial gyms, the race is now part of a growing business model that stretches well beyond the finish line. It's also influencing how some fitness businesses operate. HYROX events are being supported by training programs, partner gyms, and branded experiences.
I think you find with races similar to look at marathons and triathlons, you've got so many different things you need to think about when it comes to a race, whether it's what do I wear, what do I eat, how do I train, where do I train, and so it's very inherent to something such as HYROX, where we can then now start with working with some fantastic partners who can provide the apparel solutions, Centre can provide the training solutions, and also allows us to partner with gyms around Singapore.
Some gyms in Singapore are now aligning their programming to match the HYROX race calendar.
As a coach, I definitely have more clients who specifically want to train for HYROX as part of their fitness journey. But I'm also seeing more at different gyms that people are starting to train for HYROX themselves.
Participation has also risen quickly.
Since 2023, the known of HYROX in Singapore has grown tremendously, starting from, if I'm not wrong, maybe 3,000 plus of participants to 6,000 to 7,000. It has grown within the span of 2 years, even 3.
That adds up to big money for HYROX, which is forecast to make $140 million in revenue this year. Beyond the race, HYROX is making inroads across the wider fitness economy through branded gear, digital content and performance products.
And then, of course, you start discovering different brands that are going to help you with your performance as well. So, whether you are looking for the best HYROX shoe, which I know is often a very popular debate amongst people, or, which apparel, which smartwatches, I think there's a lot of different things that then you start to become more aware of and fold into your lifestyle.
Still, some observers note that the growing emphasis on gear and branded experiences may not appeal to everyone, particularly those drawn to simpler, less commercial formats. It's not just about race day. HYROX is positioning itself as a year-round model with structured training, loyal communities and a growing global footprint. But as the sport expands, so do the questions around access, cost and longevity. For now, HYROX continues to draw interest from athletes, coaches and brands alike.
It has gotten people more aware, not just training hard, but training smart. Because there's so much of strength training and running together, it then opens up to more on wellness and recovery. And I think that actually drives people more want to do better, not just getting strong, getting fast. In order to achieve that, your recovery as well as rest days and nutrition are just as important.
How much the hype over HYROX will grow remains to be seen. For now, at least, this race is spreading to more places and drawing in more participants who are keen to push themselves to the limit. Paul Sung, CNA, Singapore.
Good luck to everybody taking part in HYROX this weekend. Time to wrap up East Asia tonight now for this Friday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.